Hola, ¿es usted Rosa? Yo soy su nieta. I knock on the door of the house in Tlaquepaque, Mexico, and when the woman I'm looking for opens it, I say, "Hi, are you Rosa? I'm your granddaughter." 20 years have passed since my paternal grandmother and I have seen each other. My parents weren't married, and when they separated, all ties were cut between their families. In my freshman year of college, I finally get my papeles, my US citizenship, and I can now travel freely to the country where I was born. This particular summer, I'm on a mission. I'm 24, the same age my mom was when I was born, and I decide I'm finally ready to meet the woman whose name has both haunted and held together all the chisme, the scandalous stories about the other side of my family. The woman I'm named after is standing in front of me. She's wearing glasses and has really short hair the color of sand dollars. Her hands are wet from washing something. She invites me in and we sit in her living room and talk for a while. It's really awkward, like a Mexican soap opera, but without the dramatic music. We look at pictures, and on the TV stand, there's an invitation for my baptism. This folded up memento not only proves I was once a part of her family, but the fact she kept it all these years makes me wonder, did she carry me in her heart all this time? It gets late and we start to say goodbye when the house phone rings. It's him. ¿Dónde vives? I live in LA. Are you in school? Do you work? I graduated from Harvard. Do you need any money? I'm good. I wasn't. He gives me his phone number. I don't give him mine. Whatever the courtship rules are between absentee fathers and grown daughters, he never hears from me again. That's right. I ghosted his ass. Over the years, I never felt the need to seek a relationship with my bio dad, and if I did, I buried it. I had my mom, 4 amazing siblings. I was good. One night, during COVID, my mom and I are in her living room listening to La Sonora Santanera, her favorite band, and I'm ready for our annual confrontation about this family chisme. I hate to interrupt the kings of Mexican tropical music, but in my best Spanglish, I say to her, "Ma, I'm dropping my last name. I don't even know that guy. And I'm so cansada, so tired of being reminded that half my DNA came from some irresponsible bearded ghost." My mom turns down the music and says to me, "Hija, I never told you this, but your dad was an illegitimate child and he never knew his father. Your last name, Beltran, was passed down to you through your grandmother, Rosa." I feel the room begin to spin. And I do what anybody would do in this situation. I run to the bathroom and throw up. Maybe it was the tacos. Or maybe what I'm throwing up is the shame I've carried my whole life about being illegitimate, about being a brown immigrant without papers, about being unwanted in more ways than one. My mom goes on, "Your grandma Rosa helped me. In LA, when your dad didn't show up, she took me to a lawyer and helped me apply for my green card so we could stay in this country. That changed our lives." I hear my mother this warrior woman sitting in front of me, and I take it all in. For years, I worked to erase my last name, divorce the other half of my DNA, and become my authentic self. All the things we do to heal fatherlessness. And now, what am I supposed to do with this information? If La Sonora Santanera had actually been playing in our living room that night, I know they would have stopped to listen to this chisme. Thank you.
Lately, I've been struggling with work-life balance, and I don't know about you, but for me, it's not just the pandemic. I love what I do. I am out here developing the next generation of activists and organizers for the social justice movement. And as much as I love it, I also love self-care. That feeling I get when I'm eating healthy and exercising and meditating and dancing and traveling. It's just that I honestly haven't done anything on the personal side. I'm gaining weight because I've been skipping meals, which doesn't make any sense, but I know I haven't been exercising or meditating. I can't remember the last time I went out dancing without work on my mind, and I haven't traveled solo in years. It feels like my personal checklist is done, but my work checklist is done, but my personal checklist, none. The thing about it is, I used to be that person. 5 years ago, when I was 28, I went on my own Eat, Pray, Love journey, and it was incredible. I feel like I really learned and became the best version of myself. I quit my job as a high school teacher. I bought a bright red backpack. I sold everything in my Brooklyn apartment, and I went on this journey to really discover myself. And honestly, I wish I could tell y'all about everywhere I went. I went so many places in that year, but we don't have all day. And so I'll give you some of the highlights. I started off on a safari in South Africa. Then I went to Dubai, where I lived in opulence. I'm talking about brunches in castles, 7-star hotels. It was wild. I blew my budget, which is why I was so lucky that my grandmother was in Egypt visiting family. And so I went to stay with her for a few weeks to save some money. We practiced Arabic, we bonded, we reconnected, but I was under her strict Muslim rules. And so I had to sneak away. And when I did, I swam in the Nile and I scuba dived in the Red Sea. I mean, it was incredible, and it didn't stop there. I rode on ATVs and kissed some white boys in Greece. I experienced paradise in Croatia. I met a cutie in Croatia and went with him to Austria, and I just zigzagged through Europe. I tasted delicious food in the Czech Republic. I encountered racism in Poland. I danced the night away in Ukraine. I even dipped my toes in bathhouses in Hungary. I climbed the Eiffel Tower and I rode on the London Eye. I went everywhere. I even made it to Latin America and Asia. And eventually I wound up back in Africa, where I road tripped through Morocco. And I honestly had the time of my life in Cape Verde, or Cabo Verde, as the locals call it. The most beautiful Black people fishing and diving and surfing on the most beautiful beaches I had ever seen. But the thing about it is, it's not about where I traveled, but it's about how I did it. Let me tell you, I was on a budget. I found $19 flights from London to Morocco. I jumped in taxis with strangers and then went with them to their Airbnb and split the cost. I even met a porn star on the beach who offered to let me stay with her for 2 whole weeks for free. These were lifesavers, you all. Like, they were so amazing because my max budget per night was like $5 to $10. in some of these places, the minimum I found, nothing was under $30. And the average was like $200. And I honestly, like, the stories of generosity were endless, because I would have never been able to afford this adventure on the budget that I had. And, it's mind blowing, because when I first read Eat, Pray, Love, I remember thinking, this shit right here is for white girls, wealthy, privileged white people. And I was like, who has the luxury not to work? Honestly, me, the daughter of Egyptian and Guatemalan immigrants, people of color like us who are first generation, especially those of us who made it here. You don't get to Harvard from the hood by not being on top of your shit. Like, you just don't. And so for me, I feel like I had to learn. And through those travels, I felt like I had so much fun, but I was also free. And I felt so fearless. And that's what I want to get back to. I had the time of my life, but it was because I really knew and learned what it meant to take care of myself, to listen to myself, to wake up and do my morning routine, smile, which is something that I made up, but it's smile and gratitude, meditation and visualization, inner child affirmations, loving my body, which is about exercising, eating breakfast, going to the bathroom if I have to, and exploring my mind and soul, which is all about reading and journaling. And honestly, I know that living here right now in LA, amidst all the injustices and inequities that we see every day in our lives, like, I can use Smile to find inner peace. My morning routine, that's what it's there for. And so I'm coming back. While I've struggled with work-life balance, I'm coming back to really understand, and I'm getting there little by little.
As a child, I distinctly remember a very hot day. I was walking to the outhouse and I looked out on the horizon and I could see the nearest town to where I grew up, Winslow, Arizona. And I just looked out there and I thought, today's really hot. I would love to have a cold bowl of cereal. Like, what would I give to have a cold bowl of cereal? And then I looked out again and I thought, man, the poorest kid in Winslow doesn't have to yearn for a bowl of cereal like I do. They can just walk to the refrigerator, open it up, and they have cold milk. I don't even have a refrigerator, much less electricity. My parents don't buy milk because it spoils in our ice chest. And, this story of inequity is something that I grew up with. My circumstances were very different from the people living 20 miles away from me in Winslow. And this story remains the same today. A third of my people live without running water and a third live without electricity. The home I grew up in still doesn't have these things. The 5-mile road from our house to the highway remains unpaved. And so, growing up, I often felt like I had more in common with the kids that I saw in the National Geographic magazines than I did with my own neighbors. And I always wonder, why do things change so significantly when you cross the reservation line? What is it about that fence line that makes a difference in whether I have electricity or running water or a telephone? What is it about my community that makes it okay for us to have less than others? So this question really bothered me as a child. And then in high school, I attended a public high school. And I was going through history courses. It struck me that Native Americans really weren't covered in the history books. They talked about prehistoric people who are no longer here in the first chapter. And that was the last you heard of Native Americans. It was like we were written out of history. And I really wanted to hear more about, the living, breathing Native Americans that were still here, like myself, and thought, I want to rewrite the history books someday. And, my budding activism took a backseat as I focused on, getting the best grades and getting into college. High school was the first time that I was able to participate in extracurriculars because up until that point, I had a 3-hour bus commute into and out of the reservation. And so I made the most of that experience. I joined every club I could, every sport I could, ran for president of everything I could, trying to get the most out of that experience because I'd never had that opportunity before. And that happened to be the perfect thing to do if you wanted to go to a school like Harvard. And I was just looking to get as far from my community as I could. I was working so hard to get out of the poverty in my community and was afraid that if I stayed home, I would never be able to get out of that environment. So Harvard was the school furthest away from home in basically every respect. So I happily departed for that journey and plan to never look back. But in my studies at Harvard, I stumbled into an American West history course and learned about the dispossession of the native peoples of this land, and realized, wow, the law has played this huge role in legitimizing this process. And I want to learn how to take that apart and make sure that the people in my community are treated as equal human beings, as equal Americans, and have access to the same resources that any other citizen in this country does. And so, I embarked on that path, was fortunate to be selected to be Attorney General of my nation, and had the opportunity to go home and try to take on some of these problems, and struggle to transform a failing criminal justice system. And I personally grew up in situations where my family needed to call the police for help, but we couldn't do it because we didn't have a phone. And in the one instance when we were able to contact the police using a CB radio, they weren't able to find our home because we lived on a dirt road in an unmapped region, essentially. And so we were kind of left on our own. And that was very much in my mind in trying to revise and strengthen our public safety system. But there was a lack of political will to act and infuse our system with the resources it needed. So I learned the limitations of government and, stepped away when my term ended, and found myself taking on the challenge of COVID, which struck our community shortly after my term ended. And that has just been really, really incredible. We've been so successful in bringing resources to our community. And now we're in a position where we have funds left over and are able to invest in our community, invest in our own people, and transform our community. So hopefully the future generations of children in our community don't have to long for cold milk the way I did.
When I was 5, I remember standing in front of the mirror and squeezing my cheeks, waiting for them to turn pink. Earlier that day, my teacher had mentioned how often another student blushed, and I shouted out, "I blush all the time too," as a teacher's pet. She harshly replied, "Black people don't blush." I didn't understand why not. At 8, my blonde best friends from down the street couldn't play one morning because their mom was bleaching their hair. I didn't exactly know what bleaching was, but I ran to my mom and I asked her if she could bleach mine too. "Jalen, we don't do that," she said. And I didn't understand why my hair couldn't do the things that theirs did. When I was 18, my friends and I ventured away from our predominantly white college campus into the outskirts of our predominantly Black college town. We circled the parking lot and we saw for the first time a crowd of Black faces. One of them clearly feared for her safety, and she boldly said to us, "We can't stay here. They're going to break into our car. They're Black. They're going to attack us." I shrank into my own Black skin. Didn't have anything to say. And the celebration ended there. As a junior in college, a white classmate came up to me and asked me why Black people have such odd names. I laughed and I said that we should stick with easier names. A Black classmate listening nearby audibly cringed. Oof, I was so ashamed. I've grown up through my entire life, from my childhood into my adulthood, in a sea of white faces. I'm often the only Black person in the room. And to be honest, I never thought that was weird until I was a freshman in college and I joined my first Black student union. That's when I started to dissect how I sat in my own identity. You see, I'd always seen myself and my Blackness as a neutral part of me. I was tall, I was smart, I liked tennis, and I was Black. These things weren't good, bad, exceptional, or controversial. They just were. I just was. And it wasn't until joining that Black student union that I started to unpack all of the ways that I've been subconsciously pushing down parts of myself, and I didn't even realize it. And I started to understand all of the ways that I was subconsciously apologizing. And in some ways, I'm still apologizing, but in more ways, I'm still learning. And I'm starting to find my voice. I've stopped prioritizing the comfort of others over my right to exist, over the right for my Blackness to find peace in a world that prays for its discontent. It took me too long to realize all of the ways that I've been faking neutrality at the expense of my own skin. And the shame of that truth has come in painful waves. Sometimes I'm still that 18-year-old sitting in the backseat of that car, silent and lonely. But as I've gotten older, my Blackness has gotten louder. It's gotten bolder. At 22, I started telling the baristas at Starbucks how to say my name, my real name, and how to spell it correctly. It's Jailyn, Jailyn. Before that, I was simply Jay. And at 24, my uncle warned a younger cousin of mine to stay out of the sun to avoid getting too dark. The next day, we spent the whole day outside. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie wrote through the voice of Ife Melu and Americana. Some Black women will rather walk naked through the streets than wear their natural hair out. That hit me like a punch to the gut. And at 27, I took my braids out. And I felt as if I was letting the world see me, every natural part of me, for the first time. My growth has been a bumpy and at times painful road, but it's one that leads to freedom. And that freedom is rooted in my history and my community. I'm tired, but I'm determined to keep growing. I'm a little scraped up, but I'm happy. And I no longer pretend that my Blackness is neutral. I'm tall, I'm smart, I still like tennis, and I'm boldly Black.
I'm at the beach, California Central Coast, summertime 3 years ago. My wife and I are celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary, and we thought it'd be a good idea to have a little reunion, bring together all the kids from all over the country to come together to see if we made a good choice 30 years ago, or maybe we made a good choice about renting this rickety old beach house here on the Central Coast of California. Except there's one problem. I'm on the beach and I'm fully clothed. I'm a workaholic. I even have my phone here, and the phone rings. Robocall, it's a 617 number. Harvard? It's Chloe. I know her, but she says, you don't know me, but I'm calling from a list and you're in the class. Are you coming to the reunion? And before I can answer, she launches into how she has 2 kids and one works for Google and he's special and searchable. And my daughter, well, she's special. And my husband, I met him freshman year. We're married still. We're not in therapy. We're therapists. How about you? Do you want to be Facebook friends? And I'm thinking, this is why some people who didn't go to Harvard hate certain people who did. I mean, how do I counter that? I met my wife. She went to Berkeley and now she's a senior VP at PETA and we're vegan, so we don't eat meat. But she comes on the Tucker Carlson show, after which I make her sleep on the couch for 7 days afterwards. And my kids, my 3 kids, Caucasian, Filipino, Caucapinos. And every soccer trophy I bought for them, they earned. I didn't want to spill too many details, otherwise Chloe would want them as clients. The point is, this woman played a significant role in my Harvard career. I met her freshman year at a mixer. I was a fresh-faced San Francisco kid. My father was a Filipino immigrant, a professional fry cook. Me, I was going places. And here I found Chloe fetching. Not kvetching, fetching. And I said, we ought to go on a coffee date sometime. The next day, I'm at her dorm. I'm knocking on her door, and her overprotected roommates say, oh, Chloe, she's busy washing her hair. Washing her hair? You mean like in that Broadway show, South Pacific? I'm from the West Coast. I like wet. I didn't get a different answer. I get it. I was being crushed by my crush. So insignificant a thing, but this sort of thing snowballs, especially on the East Coast. It lets self-doubt creep in. Self-doubt. Was it because I wasn't white? Because I wasn't rich enough? Maybe because I wasn't Filipino enough? I had to be self-loving, full of self-care before there was a mindfulness, self-loving, not in the freshman dorm kind of self-loving, but in that mindfulness kind of way. And no one knew what mindfulness was back then. It took me 4 years to find myself. I took a history class, an Asian history class, and studied Filipino immigration. No textbooks. Had to go straight to Widener, to the stacks. And there it was, the whole story about my father. He came from the Philippines as a colonized Filipino, not a citizen, not a slave, not a citizen, couldn't own land, couldn't intermarry, couldn't be seen with white women. In the 20s, you'd be shot or you'd be killed if you were seen with a white woman. I didn't realize that it took some courage to be a Filipino in America. Armed with that story, it gave me courage to do the only thing I ever did at Harvard. I was a member of the Lampoon, and I gave the Ivy oration my year. I was funnier than the president, and I was chosen to make fun of Harvard, but I wasn't joking. I went to Harvard Yard on class day, and I started speaking like this. Hello, it's so good to be here at Harvard. Veritas, Veritas. Oh, is this the right speaker? I started talking like my daddy, and people say, oh, you see, the right person. Oh, don't worry, because now I talk like this. Harvard man, America's corporate superhero, came in third world, left 2.5. And I got this laugh, this roar of approval like I'd never heard before. And they were just happy that I spoke decent English and that I was just like them, although I knew I wasn't. I knew I graduated not with white privilege. I graduated with white voice privilege, which sounds like equality, but it's a little like being in a Filipino Beatles tribute band. My dad witnessed it all, never went east of Reno in his life, and there he was in the front row. Oh, Sonny boy, you gave Harvard the finger. Yeah, and it feels so good. I'm not a Harvard man. I'm me. I'm you. I'm us. This was my affirmative action. I had Chloe on hold the whole time. I put down the phone. I took off my shirt. I'm at the beach. I turn to my wife and I say, honey, let's celebrate.